lock it? No, just close it. Thank you. Well, dear friends, we have a very interesting discussion which sounds civil nations in the 21st century. We have a very interesting panel today. We are going to work the following way. First, I will introduce our panelists. We'll make a brief introduction to set the tone. Then we will conduct a poll, which we will run again after speakers' presentations to see if there are any changes in your opinions. We are joined by a new expert. And to be able to introduce him correctly, Abdulrahman Aymani, he's the head of ISIC organization. So let me start with him. Mr. Abdulrahman Ayman, head of the international organization ISIC. Many of you may have heard about that. It's quite active in this country as well. And that's a major international organization in the area of volunteering. The next on the panel is someone sitting next to me, Mr. Vladimir Zorin. Give a round of applause to him. Mr. Zorin is one of the leading experts in our countries on inter-ethnic relations. Since 2000 to 2004, he was a minister for ethnic matters in the Russian Federation. He was a State Duma deputy. He was a deputy plenipotentiary representative of the Russian president in various regions. He is now the member of the Council for Inter-Ethnic Relations of the President of the Russian Federation. A round of applause to him once again, please. Eldar Gilmudinov is the head of the State Duma's Committee for the Inter-Ethnic Affairs. He's one of the most experienced individuals who has a wealth of political experience. He's been a State Duma deputy for a number of years now. He used to be a Komsomol member. He actively supports youth and does everything possible to help us, and I would like to welcome him here at the 19th World Festival of Youth and Students. A round of applause to him as well, please. Mr. Grigory Petushkov. He might look young, but he is very experienced in what he does. He is the head of the National Council of Youth and Children's Associations and head of the National Preparatory Committee for the preparation of the 19th World Festival of Youth and Students. He has done a lot to organize this event, to make this festival a reality in this country. He's also the head of the Institute of Youth Policy of the Moscow Technological University. Miss Leokadia Drobizheva, a legendary scholar, a historian, a sociologist, a doctor emeritus of the Sociology Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. She is also a member of the Presidium of the Council for Inter-Ethnic Relations of the Russian President. This is a person who knows this issue very well, and she is sure to tell us a lot of interesting things. Ms. Drobizheva. So we should also introduce Eldar himself. So actually on the panel we have 3 members of the Council for Inter-Ethnic Relations of the Russian President. So whatever you tell us today will be reported to the President. And half of the panel have something to do with the National Council for Youth and Children's Associations, and the other half come from the Komsomol. So I believe this is where we should stop our introductory remarks. We have lots and lots in common. We have known each other for many years now. Let's turn to what we're supposed to do. The nation, a socio-economic and spiritual community, there are several approaches to understanding this problem. The first one is related to the political community of a certain state, and the second approach says that this is an ethnic unity with the same language and consciousness. In international law, nation is the same as nation-state. Modern researchers believe that nation formation or ethnic group formation is an objective process. The growing role of absolutism resulted in lower importance of the church, and it was replaced by the national project, so to speak. And the First Nations started to appear, in Benedict Anderson's opinion, something that can be disputable in Latin America. They took shape during their struggle with the Spanish crowd in France, after the French Revolution, in the US, after the Civil War. So nation-state is a constitutional form of self-identification, determination of people of a particular nation or ethnic group on a certain territory. The system of nation-state started taking shape back in Europe after the Peace of Westphalia. That was a result of the 30-year war, and that enshrined in international treaties the international status of the New World Order. The essence of this world order consists in the following. The sovereignty of state power was of utmost importance. Ensuring the integrity was of utmost importance. After the Versailles Treaty, the so-called nation-states, sovereign independent states, emerge, and the power in such states is absolute. The territorial integrity is absolute, and this is when we start speaking about what we call civil nations or civil ethnic group. The emergence of nation and nation-states ushered in a new era in the development of humanity. A number of scientific and technological evolutions took place. The economy has become more effective. The well-being of the population has increased. Today, the nation is one of the best forms of self-organization that we can speak of. This is all was made possible thanks to the nation-states, the emergence of nation-states. The nation-states in their time was set up in order to protect the citizens from the outer enemies, to ensure public order within a state, and pursue domestic and external policies, and ensure financial stabilities. And this is what nation-states did quite successfully, have been doing quite successfully. And the 20th century is the most important stage in their development. But today, under the influence of globalization, the sovereignty and the power of nation-state is being undermined, and many globalization researchers and philosophers, scholars engaged in nation-states and nation-building, start saying that nation-states in the 21st century is not in line with the geopolitical realities. And some people even claim that nation-states will die out and will be replaced by supranational entities. The new global capital, with the help of its institutional tools, sets up new non-state centers of power. The state is losing its sovereignty in the area of politics and economy. Now, such supranational state entities as the OSCE, NATO, the UN are quite legal in terms of international law, can exercise pressure on sovereign states. They introduce or impose sanctions, limited military contingents. They can depose the leaders of some states, and thus interfering in the sovereignty of individual states. Such countries suffered from that. Yugoslavia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, North Korea, Syria, Libya, that suffered from such actions or aggressions, if we will, of international, supranational bodies. Another important trend is being observed that are limiting the sovereignty. Private military companies are violating the monopoly on the use of force that used to belong to nation states. Private military companies are not subject to state control. The US dollar as an important tool undermines the financial sovereignty. Some states become dependent on international institutions or international financial crisis, and in this regard, national governments can control little in the economy. International terrorism spreads violence, and it's difficult for states to grapple with the problem. This is a very important problem indeed. Separatism, all of us see what is going on in Spain. A referendum was held in Catalonia. Madrid is doing its best to preserve the integrity of the country, but Catalonians do want to secede. The problem is acute in Great Britain as well. I'm talking about the integrity. Another important factor is global migration. Flows of migrants from forced migrants from Middle Eastern countries to Western Europe have laid bare lots and lots of problems. And we're talking about Western Europe that used to be a beacon of equality and democracy. Now we see that they adopt discriminational laws infringing on the rights of migrants who have come to there. We know what's going on in the United States after Ferguson's event back in 2014 when a black American was killed by a policeman. There were lots of protests, which means that not everything is so good with equality and civil rights. All of this attests to the fact that the motto, which was used to create nation states, justice, equality, brotherhood, does not work. What equality can we be talking about in France, for instance, between Frenchmen and migrants? An objective question arises: if nation states will be preserved in the future, what is the dynamics of their development? Kjell Nordström, Swedish School of Economics professor, believes that in 50 years states, in 50 years times, they will cease to exist. And instead of 280 states, we will have 600 cities. There will be no nation states. Austria will fall apart within 25 or 30 years. These are his predictions. So the question really arises if nation states will be preserved. This is what we are planning to discuss within our discussion. Before giving the floor to our panelists, I would like, above all, to make a poll. In the light of modern events, the current events, what do you think the dynamics of nation states will be? Will the inequality between the ethnic majority and the ethnic minority increase? Or the other way around, the dynamics will be reversed and there will be more equality? Once again, in your view, in the near future, will the inequality increase in nation states between ethnic majority and the ethnic minority residing in such a countries? Or in the near future, this inequality will be reduced? Those of you who believe that inequality will only increase, which means there will be no nation state or civil society, because nation states should be about equality. Those of you who believe that inequality will increase, please raise your hands. We're talking about 20 or 50 years. Who can help me count? So Camille, count people on this side, and another person will count them on the other side. So those of you who believe that inequality will continue to increase. "20 over here." Once again, please raise your hand, those of you who believe that inequality will increase. I think there are more hands than the numbers you've given me. 37 all in all, plus 10 over there. So all in all, 37 people. Now, those of you who believe that the other way around, equality will increase, there will be more justice, raise your hands, please. Panelists are not supposed to vote, I'm sorry. '81. We have an audience of optimists, which is great. Well, I tried to sow some doubts into your souls, but I failed, which is good. The first question, the floor is given to Mr. Zorin. From your point of view, the civil nation or civil society in our country, is it a unique process, or did we follow the same process as other Western countries? Thank you very much indeed. I would like to welcome all of you. The introductory remarks deprives us of an opportunity to explain what we think. I think the result is evident. The figures were quite convincing. However, just a few remarks, if I may, on this. Indeed, we are discussing the future of nation-states and civil nations in the 21st century. Our moderator came up with a number of questions we had to look at, but we can paraphrase it. Is there a future in the state? Does the state have a future? Do civil nations have a future? For starters, as someone who represents the Institute of Anthropology of the Russian Academy of Science, there are about 6,000 ethnic groups or tribes and languages. 6,000, just think of it. Well, statistics can differ, but that's the average number. At the same time, I would like to remind you that in the world, states are referred to as nations, and the most important international organization is referred to as the United Nations Organization, as you all understand, which is quite symbolic in my view.
If we take 6,000 and divide this figure by, so somebody says 200, but I've heard another figure of independent and non-aligned states. So divide 6,000 by 200, and what do you get? So we will get the number of peoples per nation, per state. So the modern idea of a nation is that of a civil society consisting of multi-ethnical societies and multi-confessional ones. So I see some foreign guests here in the audience, and perhaps you don't know that, but the Russian Federation is the biggest nation, our politicians say, in the world in terms of the number of ethnical groups, but it's not true. India is the biggest one in this respect. So, and Southeast Asia is in this respect much more diverse than Russia. There are lots of languages there, ethnic groups. In the Russian Federation, we have 193 ethnical groups with 277 languages, and more than 80 languages are taught in schools and higher educational establishments. And our VGTRK company, this is a TV channel, it's on the Guinness record book in terms of the number of languages it broadcasts. It broadcasts in 60 languages. So what is the second best broadcasting company? Who knows that? It's not the BBC, it's Euronews. It's broadcasts in 11 or 12 languages, if I'm not mistaken. So you see, our country is really very rich in terms of ethnic groups and various languages. And so the question of shaping a civil nation and the question of inter-ethnic peace and consensus has always been the major question. So besides, our country has some more specific individual features that any other country, no other country has. First, since the very beginning of the Russian sovereignty, of the Russian state, from the very start, we've been a multi-ethnic state, and we have the oldest written document in Russian, which says that our land is very rich and abundant in resources, and we have lots of peoples. And among those peoples, by the way, are those that still live on the territory of the Russian Federation. We have the Mordva people, the Mariel Republic, where their own national minorities live. So, in other words, I've been trying to convince you that we've always been a multi-ethnic state, and our country, our state, has never been engaged in violent assimilation. And we have one more feature. We've never allowed any sectarian conflicts happen in our country. So we have never had any conflict of civilization, so to speak, according to Huntington. So we haven't had this ever. And when we talk about a civil nation in the Russian Federation or in the world, we understand that it's always a tradition, behind which we can see hundreds or thousands of years of history. And I would like to say one more thing. It has occurred to me that if nation-states have a present, not a future, of course they do have a present. Usually we think that a civil nation should always be accompanied by a civil society, but this is, kind of controversial issue. If we remember the Renaissance, where people first started speaking about some public agreement, then perhaps it was some basis for civil society. But in our country, our people, our citizens have a long history of some civil movements. When first in 1612 our people drove away foreign invaders and restored our sovereignty. So, of course, a civil nation and the civil society will have a future, although there are lots of nuances that we have to think about and that can be seen as a challenge to the future, to the nation, and to civil society. I will name some of them. First, this is the global migration challenge, some migration explosion even. You see the ethnical breakdown of many countries changing at the moment. So not only in Europe and in Asia, and you see the backlash to these trends. So the second one is climate change and urbanization. Then I can also name the growing role of the youth in society. So if we speak about Asian countries and African countries, the percentage of young citizens is really high there. So in other words, their role is growing, and this is a critical moment for all of us. So the next one is the so-called technological advancement. So you've been looking around this building, and you have seen some exhibits that can be some guests from the future, so to speak. And we can speak about the advent of new jobs, new professions, of new countries, of new groups of people. So some professions, of course, will be obsolete in the future. What can unite us in this future if we speak about our states? Of course, we should speak here about some civil peace here. This is the major value for the countries of the future. 50 years from now, then equality, justice, equal rights and opportunities. And there is also a prediction that states will proliferate. There will be more states in the future. I think it's true because globalization, despite its attraction and attractiveness, at the same time, it also boosts the cultural and ethnic self-consciousness, and it will also lead to proliferation of states. Now I would like to give the floor to Eldar Gilmudinov, and I would like you to speak about the dynamics of the civil nation in the Russian Federation in the nearest future. So the timing is about 5 minutes. It's very hard to manage to be within 5 minutes. So in the parliament, usually the rules and regulations are very strict. Here it's a little bit more democratic, but I will try to squeeze my presentation within 5 minutes. So I think that the best news is that you have all come together here in this hall, in this festival. So, and that's why the festival has realized its potential. So thank you very much for coming here, for being here. You know, when somebody, for example, if we speak about our parliament, when we discuss their nations and ethnic groups and ethnicities, so the parliament is perhaps the best representation of all our ethnical groups. I've tried once to count how many representatives of different ethnic groups I have among my acquaintances and friends in the Duma. I couldn't, I failed, because there are so many. There are so different languages, different cultures and religions, but nevertheless, when it comes to discussing the matters of our state, it does not matter who belongs to which faction in the parliament. We all try to make decisions consensus-based. The Russian nation, our civil and political nation, should be responsible for retaining the country, its diversity, its multitude of languages, of cultures, and so on. But at the same time, we have to make some uniform and some joint decisions. I've been engaged in sports and youth policy for a long time, and we all know that when it comes to football, we all root for different teams, and usually regional teams. So from the region where you come from, personally, I root for Rubin. So, and when we come together to watch some football match on TV, we start supporting different teams. But when we see our national team, then we all become united. We don't have any disagreements in supporting the team anymore. So even when somebody says, Russia, go ahead, this is the famous slogan. I'm not a Russian in ethnical terms, but I still get up on my feet and start shouting, Russia, go ahead. And when somebody asks me, what is the unity, why it has been retained, and whose achievement is that, somebody answers, it's the president and or somebody else, but I usually say it's the achievement of our peoples, of our regions, of our republics. It's your achievement because it's been achieved by our peoples through mutual respect for each other, for their cultures, and so on. Of course, we have bad people in different ethnic groups. We can see them among Russians, among Tatars, among people from Dagestan, but it's not an ethnic feature. It's just a bad person. without any ethnic background. And just a couple of words about inter-ethnic policy. Just a few years ago, the previous president issued the first concept of the so-called national policy, inter-ethnic policy in the country. And now it has grown into the President's Council, the state's program of national inter-ethnic program. We have the Federal Agency for Inter-Ethnic Matters. We have the Strategy of National Policy for 2020. We have all those structures, entities and programs that have created a big and very well-established system. So we have lots of bodies that are responsible for inter-ethnic relations. And if somebody is doing their job in a bad way, so this person is accountable, and we know who to go to when we need some decision. So one more important thing is that we're launching the so-called popular diplomacy program. So about 60 countries came to Moscow for the Eurasian Forum, for the assembly. So we expected 1,500 delegates, but finally 3,000 came, and so we had some problems with the accommodations. What does it show? It shows that there is some kind of desire in people to come together, to live in peace and harmony, to resolve conflicts and so on. We are going to support the youth movement. So in November, for example, in the State Duma, there will be a big youth forum. We are gathering different youth associations from all over the country. So, and I think that we should issue a youth law. So there should be a program for the youth of Russia, including all straight of young people. There should be some youth culture program. Now we have launched a children's project trying to fund our regions for our children travel across the country and to meet each other. It is important for young people to go to any region. It should be accessible to you. So I'm winding up. I understand that I'm running out of time. So it should be accessible and it should be affordable in financial terms, because tickets are very expensive and travel is very expensive. And the last thing to say here, we usually invite guests from different regions to our platform to discuss with them very complex issues that we have in inter-ethnic relations. We are very open to your suggestions, and we want to solve all these problems. Thank you. Thank you very much. You've been saying a lot about young people, so now it's high time to give the floor to Grigory Petushkov. Grigory, what is your opinion of the role of young people in developing a civil nation? So thank you for the question. First of all, good afternoon. I'm happy to see you all here. I'm usually very happy to see young people, but especially in this audience where I can see lots of acquaintances and friends. With lots of you, I have spent lots of time on various projects focused on national policies and inter-ethnic policies. Of course, it's very difficult to say something new after all the people who have made a presentation today here, because they are very well informed in terms of inter-ethnic and youth policies, and usually they give lots of useful information to not only young people but also adults. But in terms of youth policy, I would like to say something perhaps quite commonplace, but at the same time, this is the fundamentals of our work. First, I represent the National Council. This is an umbrella association that brings together different representatives of youth associations, and we find ourselves in a situation when we have to find solutions based on consensus and mutual interest. And it's clear that such projects are in very great demand. We need some feedback from various youth associations on them. For example, this current festival where we are present now, it's one of our projects of the National Council, because we came up with this initiative some time ago, and we have managed to do that, as you see. And all our member associations of the national state, which are more than 50, have supported this initiative, and thanks to this, we can be present here today and be part of this big, major historic event. Speaking about the ethnic policy of our country and the shaping of civil society in our country, then perhaps the key role should be delegated to youth associations and young people. So I'm not going to say what the difference is between just a good girl or a good boy from an institution. But sometimes it's necessary even in high officials' offices, because people sometimes confuse working with individual representatives of the young generations or with some institutions responsible for this. Going back to the festival, it's a good example of gathering together different people, because we first didn't involve so many representatives of the youth associations and movements as we have now, and that was the main difficulty why it took so long to bring the festival here in Russia. To be quite honest, we are starting working on the projects that the previous speakers have mentioned.
Those of you who are a bit older remember how much attention was given to that back in the Soviet times, during the times of Komsomol. A lot of attention has been given to the friendship of people, solidarity, those mottos that, again, coming back to the festival, those slogans that you can find here. These activities were quite successful, I should say, for a very simple reason. At the stage of shaping people's personality, they were aware of such things, they heard of those, and someone representing another faith or another ethnic group did not alienate them, and they were genuinely interested in getting to know such people and become friends. And again, I go back to the festival all the time. The festival itself is that real opportunity when we can speak about both inter-ethnic policy of the Russian Federation, those 200 ethnic groups residing in these countries, but also see representatives of other ethnic groups from all over the world who may seem very different from one another, might be interested in some different things, but in essence we are all identical. We all have similar values and we have similar wishes and desires. We all want more or less the same, and that's why it's particularly interesting for all of us to speak and communicate with people from other countries and continents. As for our youth today, over the past 30 years, this is the first opportunity they have, an opportunity to see that on the one hand, then have their own, so to speak, Russian identity, but on the other hand, there are so many people, so many peers in other countries which have similar values, similar interests. Am I good with the time limit? You're not going to scold me? Thank you very much. You are quite good with keeping to the time limit. Now I would like to give the floor to our Abdulrahman Almani. Maybe a few words about civil nations in the West, in the developed countries, or abroad in general. The process of nation building. What's the situation with civil nations over there, if you can, please?
Cool. Thank you very much. So first of all, I'm extremely honored to be part of this panel of fantastic experts with huge amounts of experience and knowledge in the field. I feel extremely humbled and extremely small to even be sitting on the panel in itself, yet be speaking also. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much for the invitation also to extend it to be here and part of this beautiful festival. It's my third time in Russia, by the way, so I'm really happy. So I'll talk about it from a little bit of a different perspective. A perspective that can be or sound a little bit more progressive or contemporary or unorthodox, let's say, just putting it in that format. Currently, we're living in an era which is called, or which is known in the form of the era of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is a revolution that is coming or rooting out of that idea of digital disruption. Coming forth with that, I was born in 1991. And back at that point in time, the generation gap was every 10 years. So every 10 years is considered as a demographic segment of society that is called a generation. Looking forth from that to where my baby sister now is 4 years old, from her to my other younger sister, which is a gap of 5 years, they're considered to be from two different generations. Just a 5 years difference in generation gap. Because now, me, you, who here has a Facebook account? Do you have a Facebook account? So here's my take on Western state. The biggest current nation in the world is Facebook. Facebook is a nation of more than 2 billion people around the world, which is a completely different take at things, because it's governed by a completely different set of rules, a completely different set of socio and economical demographics. It even has its own sustainable enterprises and civic platforms for engagement that are all digital-based. But that's a different way of looking at it. Currently, we look at, or we're living at a moment where we hear things such as the rise of the global citizen, or a citizen that, or people that associate themselves not to certain ethnic or socio-demographic groups, but they associate themselves to what was earlier mentioned, to a certain set of values, or a certain set of ideas, or ideas that make them part of a certain belief system, and that's what they associate themselves to. So it doesn't matter what would be my ethnic background, where I come from, what is that label that usually society would put on us, but what would matter is, do we come from the same value system? And in that in itself, we would find a common way of progress or a common way to move forward. And that's what we would identify each other with. But unfortunately, in that same time, with that rise of that global citizen, we still live in a world where populism, nationalism are concepts that are still on the rise. And we've witnessed that also in a lot of different examples, whether in the Western world, in previous rounds of elections, etc., and political reform. So would we look at it from a perspective of two different forces, or like the wise Chinese would say, the yin and yang, as two different forces that are opposing, where you have that rise of globalization or the global citizen, and on the other side you have the rise of populism and nationalism, and then you're always asked to make a choice and take a side. But at the end of the day, a lot of times the choice is to find the common ground of conversation. And the choice is not necessarily a battle or a fight of which is going to prevail or which is going to win, but more a platform of being able to build compromise and conversation. We're living currently also in a world where, at least that's what I believe in, a world that by 2030 wants to work for reducing inequalities, and that believes that tomorrow is going to be better. And I was very happy when you guys were raising your hands and I saw that there is hope, there is optimism. But of course there is optimism, because we belong currently to a world where child mortality in sub-Saharan Africa is on the decrease. We live in a world where me, as a young Egyptian national, I'm here in Russia, in this beautiful country, speaking to young people from more than maybe 100 countries, and I'm speaking freely. I feel free. I'm saying my thoughts. I'm saying what's on my mind. I'm not going to be prosecuted. And that is progress. And that is fantastic. And this group of people that are here within this room at this current moment is a testament of nothing but our progress as humanity and how far we've come. And when I look at the young people here within this room, I see a future generation of leaders that can fight for these kind of ideals, fight for that value-based individual above nation state. Nation state is important, and it's something that you hold within you, and it's something that you hold with pride. But in the same time, how can the fight, or the fight that we want to fight, be a fight that we want to fight together? Not a fight that we want to fight against each other to see who's going to prevail. And last but not least, if there's one key thing that I would close my remarks off with, and I hope I'm on time with that, is if there's one thing that gives me hope in how tomorrow is going to look like, or how civil society is going to look like, is at this current moment, a lot of people in the world associate themselves to what we so-called civil society, or civil society is starting to play a more major role in development. But what gives me the biggest hope is that we started shifting in terms of mindset from just inviting young people to participate, where, yes, you're invited, come, you can sit on the table, to giving young people the opportunity to shape policy, framework, and decision-making. Because within that, you're not only invited to the table, but you also can have drinks and food with the adults and also get to participate and speak. Because where I come from, sometimes that was not really possible, but now it is. So I'm very, very happy for that. So yeah, thank you, guys, and I'm very, very happy to be here in Russia.
Thank you very much, Abdulrahman Aymani.
A very fiery presentation, very optimistic one indeed. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to you. And I would like to round up our panelists' presentations by giving the floor to Leocadia Drobizheva with the question of why the policy of multiculturalism and nation building is collapsing in the West. In your view, what are the future trends going to be, the trends of civil society development within the coming 20 years? Some people believe that nation states will cease to exist. What's your take on that? My colleagues were right in saying that our future, in many respects, depend on what kind of people we are. It depends on our personalities and our interpersonal relations, and you applauded to this idea. At the same time, when we leave this room, and when we leave the festival compound, we will realize that we are living in a world where diversity continues to grow. It grows every time we meet someone, some new challenges. Yes, indeed, we log in on Facebook and there we're equal. But when we start a new job, when we apply to a university, then it turns out that some get more opportunities and others get fewer opportunities. Only for a simple reason that they have a lesser educational potential, and some get fewer opportunities because education is less valued. So the world is full of diversity, and the international community is facing the challenges it has to grapple with, it has to address. And as you are aware, one of the challenges the entire world has faced is the problem of politics in individual states. The policy is rather policy rather than politics, the policy of multiculturalism, which recognizes the diversity of culture. And all of a sudden, back in 2010, it turns out that leading Western countries are against this policy. Angela Merkel says at the meeting with the youth leaders of her party, people can live hand by hand, but they have no unity, and this is wrong. Multiculturalism has not justified itself. It has failed. Sarkozy, and he is even more categorical in his assessment. He says people live together, but they don't have a French identity. How can they live together in this world together? Lastly, the British Prime Minister dots all the I's, saying if they don't have a British identity, they will be susceptible to the influence of other ideologies, which means that radicalism can affect them. The Internet can both unite and disunite us, because radicalism is also spread through the Internet. What are we to do? Civil society is what we need, and this is what many people say. Similarly, we have a situation in this country. We are aware that we are to develop civil society and the common civil identity, or civic identity, if you will. What are the way out? Several models are proposed of how to develop or pursue this ethnic policy. There are three proposals in the world. They are being developed discussed in Europe, in the United States, and in this country as well. Some say that we should be speaking about the free culture. Every individual should be free to choose his or her culture. He can preserve his traditional culture, so to speak, or ethnic one, or he can move on to other platforms and assume the French identity and be a German and at the same time a Bavarian, which will be even more important for him. The diversity will continue to grow. The second model says the so-called differentiated culture, when states are to choose and people living are to choose. There is one sphere of culture at home, communicate with our friends, and we quite possibly will retain the traditional models that have been out there for a while. But there is a different culture, a political one, for instance. We are involved in elections, we participate in civil society, and there we're all to be one and speak in one voice. So we speak about differentiated cultures. And this third model is referred to as the intercultural model, which is quite similar to what we have back in the Soviet times, internationalism, when people have retained both their culture and the common culture that consists of the same values. Let's have a closer look. Can we switch on the presentation, please? So we have common human values that are shared by each and every one in the global world of diversity. Such common values as love, justice, family, education, achievements of science and culture, patriotism. We also have human values that are studied by the international research community. Then we speak about security, openness, taking care of other people, self-affirmation, accord or harmony, self-dependence. On the left, you see the values that are related to security. Russian youth, Russian citizens are of the same opinion on these views with the international community. The third column is when we are somewhere in between. We don't share everything. And there are certain values that are quite known to us. They're foreign to us. I mean, self-dependence, for instance, and the value of being open to changes is also important value, something that our previous speaker mentioned in his presentation. We also have other sets of value related to the civil society as such. Civil society we want to build. Civic identity values. Human rights, justice, regardless of your ethnic identity, faith, equality, inadmissibility of discrimination, which is important, and something civil society all over the world is fighting for, and the Russian Federation is no exception. We are building a civil society similarly to what people do in other countries. Remember what I mentioned about Sarkozy. Everyone should be French. We're not saying this straightforward. We are not saying that everyone should be Russians, but we want all people to have those Russian values. If we are building these values, and we have been building it since 1990s, and in the 2000s, yes, this is the ideology one can hear at all sorts of presidential fora, and that echoes in our hearts, because people consider this to be one of the most important values. I attended the youth festival back in 1985, and I befriended a person who was a musician from St. Petersburg. He had a nickname, a pig. Back in the 1980s, they started verification of passports, but passports used to have this ethnic group line, and that his band had people from Azerbaijan, and law enforcement bodies started detaining them in the streets. So what my friend did, he crossed out the word Russian in his passport and wrote "I'm non-Russian" in his passport. He wanted to feel a part of the musical band, be like those people from Azerbaijan who were discriminated against by the militia. When we start feeling like other people, when we can walk in other people's shoes, this will be a great achievement for our society. When I was first invited to the radio back then, and then invited to the police because he broke the law, but I said that he should be justified. Now you see, more than a half, 80% of people consider themselves to be Russian citizens or Russians. Why is this important? Because at the same time, people feel, they feel that are not discriminated against. This civil nation or civic nation makes it possible to feel that they're not discriminated, that they are equal with others, which forms a resource for developing civil society, which makes it possible for people to feel this equality. Therefore, I believe that the motto coming both from the bottom and from the top, unity in diversity, is what we need. This is the same what we call interculturalism, and the world will boast mutual understanding and good relations regardless of people's faith or ethnic background. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Drobizheva. Dear friends, I would like to take the same poll to see if we have fewer skeptics in this audience now. Once again, I will ask you to raise your hands. Who supports the idea that in the near 20 years, inequality will continue to grow? Inequality between the ethnic majority and minority, despite what our expert says. So who believes in the growing inequality? Do the counting, please. So who believes in growing inequality, please? Seven, 9, and 4. 20 all alone. 17 pessimists fewer. We should take into account those who have left, but the dynamics is quite clear. There are fewer pessimists now, which clearly shows.
So perhaps it's a result of the report that Mr. Lavrov yesterday gave, so if we speak about pessimists in our audience, perhaps they are very deeply convinced pessimists, and that's the trait of their character more than their attitude towards the modern trends. Now, before giving the floor to the audience, actually, and give them this opportunity to ask questions, I would like to give about a couple of minutes to our guest, Ruslan Gusarov, who is the author of a unique project, The Beacons of Friendships of Towers of the Caucasus. I think this project contributes a lot to this civil solidarity and ethnic consensus, and it contributes to shaping a civil nation. So, Ruslan, please try to be very brief and give us information about your unique project. Good afternoon. When we entered the room, my wife told me that this panel discussion is the best one in our festival because Halka Dragon was from the Games of Thrones was invited here. So, but this is really a very interesting discussion because we have very outstanding panelists today, and our expert, for example, has given a very interesting presentation about multiculturalism, and we have deputies of the State Duma here, and we're raising a very important question here. So I would like to say that the civil identity and the creation of a world nation is something unattainable, but we're living in Russia with more than 200 ethnic groups with different languages, and this is really an important question to us. And I would like to tell you about how our project has managed to contribute to building this civil society and civil nation and creating civil identity in Russia. So we have, of course, various ethnic tensions and disagreements in the country. That's very natural. But how can we resolve them? We have decided in our project to take the way that is not our invention, but still it's very good. So now we have heard why multiculturalism failed in Europe. So perhaps the reason is that they don't have any joint goal, joint activity. Our project gives such joint goals and activities to our young people. So we have offered volunteering, educational activities, and media activities. So they all come within one project, the Beacons of Friendship, they can be translated. So the first beacon of friendship was the Towers of the Caucasus. This is a very, these are very famous medieval historical objects in the Caucasus that were fortitudes in the Middle Ages, and we have gathered a team of young people and offered them to go to the Caucasus and to work to restore the famous Caucasian towers and to explore the culture and history of the Caucasus, of the peoples of the Caucasus, and to inform their subscribers on social networks about these activities. So I can remember my childhood when, after the academic ended in school, when you, for example, had a quarrel with one of your friends, and you went into the summer vacation in a very bad mood over it, but when you came back to school again and saw your friends, there was no quarrel anymore, because the summer actually was the period when everything had been forgotten. Or in my sports activities in my childhood, our coaches usually united us by giving us some joint activities. And this is exactly how it works in our project. So here you see the stages of our project. We have spent 2 years on expanding our projects and on working with different people in the Caucasus. Now you can see a part of our very big team here in this audience. I want them to get up and to welcome all of you. So I can say a lot, but I just want you to look at these two screens. Here you see the diaries. These are the blogs or posts of our participants that they posted on social networks, and you can see that through these postings they tried to share their emotions, their outlook, their attitudes to people's cultures, and so on. And that was a result of just our project. You know, this is something that you cannot act. It's not... It's a very natural activity. You just have to go through this and to get this experience. And that's how it works. After this experience in the Caucasus, our participants came to these thoughts, ideas, and feelings. So I invite you to join our project. Now our project has been expanded. So our partner projects are patriotic, historical, environmental, healthcare projects. And you can find all the necessary information about this on our website. And now we're trying to create a popular movement, the Beacons of Friendship, and we urge all those living in Russia and abroad to create their own beacons of friendship and to gather other people around them and to build all those multi-ethnic and inter-ethnic relations to establish and cultivate them. Besides, in our country has the strategy of ethnic policy. It's been mentioned a lot in this audience today, and I agree with this. And what I'm saying is that our state, the president of Russia, Salam Magomedov in person, and his employees are supporting our project very actively in conceptual and organizational terms. And it's not surprising that we have come to this festival because we have lots of partner associations here. I thank Kantemir Kurtayev and also Grigory, who is a co-organizer of our project and another project of ours. So come to our website, create your own beacons of friendship, and we will share our expertise with you. Thank you, Ruslan, very much. Now, friends, you can ask your questions to our speakers. We have about 15-20 minutes. So for our Q&A session, I need 2 volunteers to give mics. Yeah, so the first question from the young person there. So, good afternoon. My name is Alman. I'm from the Azerbaijani and Russian youth movement, and I'm from St. Petersburg. And I have a question to Vladimir Yurovich. When Kantemir made this survey about the future, I was surprised to see how many optimists we have in the audience. And I would like to tell you a story first and ask a question to Vladimir. In 2016, right after my graduation, I was looking for a job for half a year, and when I was completely disappointed and depressed, my fellow school student suggested an idea. So we created 2 accounts on Handhunter. So we made 2 accounts with 2 identical profiles. The only difference was the account photo, the profile photo, and the name. So, and we submitted this account to for the same position in to 5 companies, and you understand what the result was. I got 5 rejections, and he got 4 invitations and 1 rejection. So since then, I've had this very unpleasant feeling about this experience, and I would like you, Vladimir Grigorovich, to comment on this. I have a question. So the question is clear, and the answer is clear. So what can I say? There are different people in St. Petersburg, in different regions, but I don't think that it characterizes the whole society of ours. So if we have 666,000 Azerbaijanis in Russia who, in the census, declared themselves to be Russian citizens, and I think that the majority of them have a job. So perhaps you just had bad luck, and those were bad people, not sharing our values. But Vladimir Yurovich, actually, this is quite a reason to go to the General Attorney's office to submit a complaint, and we just give this information to us, and we will try to check on these organizations on the criteria of their decisions. You're right, but there is a nuance. as far as I understand, there was no rationale behind those rejections. They didn't explain anything. It's just some moral inaccuracy. And I think that what you should have done, you should have posted this information on your Facebook account, for example, to tell your fellow citizens about these organizations, and then you would have gathered some support from your friends. This is quite an important question, really. This is not an ideal society we're living in. We have the same problems as other problems have, for example, in France, in the United States. We also have xenophobia. It's one of the problems of ours. So it's the legacy of our past since the two Chechen wars in the 1990s, for example. Stereotypes are bad, but healthy people are more numerous than not so healthy ones. So, and one more question over there.
عبد الرحيم بن علي اوف موروكو. فيما يخص شكرا للجنة المنظمة، شكرا للإخوان المتدخلين. غير فيما يخص
Thank you very much to all those who have organized this event. I want to say that this all those inter-ethnic problems find a good solution in Russia. I would like to mention one important thing here. I'm from Morocco, and we're trying to re-establish good relations with the EU that is engaged in resolving African problems as well. And we have to invite the elements of civil society so that the population in the Maghreb states, in Morocco, in the Berber regions could be resolved. And I should say that our country was subject to Portugal, to France, but nevertheless we have retained our national identity and cultural identity, but unfortunately we still have a situation with human exploitation, and we should, of course, based on the principles of civil society, try to overcome this negative situation, both in Africa and in the Middle East. And I would like to say that I don't think that Facebook is able to unite millions of people because reality runs counter to the reality on the internet or on Facebook. Just see what we see here in real life and on Facebook.
Я так понял, это было просто выступление.
As far as I understand, it's been just a presentation, an intervention.
الإنسان واستغلال الدول.
The question is that we have fight for the elimination of the exploitation by rich countries and human exploitation as well. I would like to support our colleague. This is a very interesting idea. Exactly what he has said about Facebook or Vkontakte, the Russian social network. My expert position is that human history has already seen different models of disregarding ethnical background and shaping our societies on ideologies. So for decades, socialist countries thought that they had resolved the ethnic issue, but unfortunately they were mistaken, and ideology did not help them. Life has shown that life is richer and practice is richer, and we still see different ethnic groups and backgrounds and differences. But the Russian Federation is rather specific in that, and it is explicitly mentioned in Article 26 of our Constitution, which says that a human being has some self-identity based on his ethnic background. So, in other words, what he thinks about himself in ethnic terms, where there he belongs. So, a person can have lots of identities. So a person can identify himself or herself with the school group, with the fellow students, with his family, and so on and so forth. You know it very well. But ethnic backgrounds is one of the key identities. And when you go on Facebook, in this virtual space, you see that ethnicity is not the most important thing. The most important thing is how cool you are, so, or how critical you are of the government or of capital, of globalization, and so on. But in real life, this different identity is more important. And ethnic and cultural diversity of the world has always been in place, still exists, and will exist in the future. Can I add a couple of words to this? What concerns me personally is that, of course, digital technologies will reshape our world radically in the nearest future. Education will be completely different. You will be completely different. Perhaps we will not see traditional schools and higher educational establishment. But at the same time, what concerns me is that our culture manifests itself in our language. And every 2 weeks, one language becomes extinct in the world. And one of the issues for Russia is also retaining our traditional languages. So young people are now speaking a very different Russian language than mine, for example. Sometimes I don't understand you when you're speaking Russian. When you don't, and all our efforts should be aimed at retaining our language. So that's why I urge you, when you go on the internet, don't forget about your language. Come back from the internet without losing your native tongue, whatever language it is, so any language, so Russian, Udmurt, Arabic, whatever. If we lose our language, we will lose our culture and people.
You wanted to ask a question. Good afternoon, Divlevich. You represent the Chukotsky Autonomous Region. I'm a Chukchi. I would like to support Mr. Girmaludinov. We are an indigenous people, and we are very few numbered. We are fewer than 20,000 people. I have someone from the Eskimo tribe. They are just 1,500. Just imagine. In some years' time, we are not sure if we will continue to exist. And the question is, what are the trends? What policy do we need for us? What do we, indigenous people, are to do? I'm referring to, for instance, some years ago, Keriki disappeared altogether. An ethnic group, so the problem is acute. Some tribes, ethnic groups are extinct. We're speaking about fairness, justice, civic rights. This is all well and good, but ethnic self-identification is still there, and we should retain it. I'm deeply convinced, and I think many indigenous people will agree with me. Here the question arises about the ethnic identity. The question is to our State Duma deputy. I am aware of such initiatives aimed at returning the line in our passport, ethnic background or nationality. It hasn't been supported. What are we to do? This is this is our pride. We should be proud of ourselves. So the question is, maybe to you or Ms. Drobizheva, what are we to do in this globalizing world? And I would like to follow up on that question, to add something to this question, if I may. I also represent an indigenous tribe from the Magadan region, that's the far north of the Russian Federation. Today, the only official proof of my... Can you hear me? The only official proof that I belong to that tribe is a certificate given to me. The government does support us. We have certain benefits, bonuses, if you will, and you name it. But for us to be able to make use of those benefits, we need to present this certificate, which is valid for just a month. In a month, my identity will change. Is that the way we should do it? Well, we are aware of this problem indeed. Over 50 indigenous people have similar problems. We have 25 languages are on the verge of extinction. Over 20 languages are close to that. Sometimes they don't even have a writing system. They only speak it orally. And we have a specialized program aimed at preserving at least some elements of the language, at least those languages where they have this writing system. If we speak about the passport and the line in your passport related to your ethnic background or nationality, we are working on that for indigenous people in particular. I looked through that draft a couple of days ago. We are now drafting relevant documents. We will set up a special register of you will be part of a register, and you won't need to present any certificates. We are going to resolve this problem very, very soon. As far as languages are concerned, the problem does exist. On the 16th of November, the State Duma will hold parliamentary hearing. We do invite representatives of your tribes. We will be discussing our language diversity and how it is to be preserved. We have a Herzen Institute in Moscow. We are trying to support them. And we're trying to attract specialist teachers. This is a problem we have. We don't have teachers who could teach those languages, so we're working on that. If I may, that's a very important question indeed. I wanted to add a little something. Let me stress it once again. Laws and policies pursued by this state are aimed at preserving the language, which means that we want you to make efforts as well for representatives of indigenous peoples' associations, for instance, to more actively interact with the state. Let me give you a fresh example. There is an indigenous tribe in the Sakhalin. In 2005, they produced a writing system which never existed, which made it possible for them to set up, to create books, textbook, course books, which will be used to teach younger generations. So we do need your efforts. Our State Duma is quite active and will be more than happy to accommodate your request. As far as the nationality or ethnic background line in your passport is concerned, that's a complex question. There are certain individuals who would like to have this information in their passports. Still others believe that this is something no one needs. I believe both have their reasons to support these positions. It's difficult for us to reach a consensus. I think that's something of the past, from the past. For instance, in my passport, I'm from Tatarstan. I have a special appendix to my passport, which is in the Tatar language, which has all the relevant information. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Ms. Drobizheva, well, talk of gender equality. They don't let me an opportunity to speak, says Ms. Drobizheva. Well, I forgive you for that. My dear, Mr. Zorin is right. I support him in that a lot depends on you yourselves. Politics is the art of the possible. You remember what happened in France, that burqas were not allowed, but then schools came out and said that if a conflict arises, we are ready to allow burqas. So we should remember that politics is the art of the possible. That's the reason why we are organizing such fora. A lot depends on us. We should get together. Young people should get together above all, because you are the boldest. You are more proactive. People of older generations keep thinking about what they can lose in such a situation, whereas you keep thinking about how to improve things. So you should be more proactive yourselves, and of course support those who preserve our culture. It's important to preserve freedom. This is something that people in France, for instance, say. When there are close communities and people living in Moscow and St. Petersburg are afraid to do something that would be against their culture because they're afraid of being condemned, they are becoming feel more freedom in the country where they come from. But when they live in a different country, the ethnic communities can be very strict on them, and they feel less freedom. So we need to preserve this feeling of dignity and freedom of choice. Do not condemn those who are not ready to consider themselves to be a member of a particular ethnic group, but especially given the fact that we have many mixed marriages. Children born in mixed marriages oftentimes assume the ethnic identity of those people who are around them. This is the information we get from the census. As far as passports are concerned, that's a social question, a matter of social issue. If our passports retained this line, discrimination in ethnic group can be more numerous. Now we can only tell a person's ethnic background by his last name. Now, if we reintroduce this line in the passports, there would be more grounds for discrimination. Absence of such a line in the passport ensures more equality. Dear friends, the final question. We are over the time limit. If you have other questions, something that has not been asked yet. So your question is different, isn't it? Okay, then the mic is yours. Try to be as brief as you can. Good afternoon, all. My name is Ilakhalek Perova. I come from Moscow. I represent the Azerbaijani Youth Organization of Russia. We speak about discrimination, infringing on rights. I've been living in Moscow since I was born. I haven't been discriminated against a single time. I've never faced discrimination of any sort. We all went to the same schools, kindergartens. We participated in all sorts of festivals. We have always been welcomed. People kept asking us, saying that they were happy to learn that we come from Azerbaijan. They wanted us to tell them about our culture, about holidays. So what somebody from the audience said, that he had faced the problem, that probably you must have been the problem yourself. You need to be professional, and that's what's important. That's what I wanted to say. My question is different, as a matter of fact. What's the role of diasporas in the maintenance of inter-ethnic peace? The question is to Petushkov and to yourself. The role of diasporas in the role of ethnic communities in the role in maintaining peace. I think Mr. Zorin would be a better person. I think the role of ethnic diasporas is great. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Zorin. I think it's not just important. It is clearly demonstrated by our experience, the discussion we're having now, the communication between the experts, civil society, and the authorities can be observed everywhere at all levels. We spoke about Ethnic Council of the Russian President. It comprises 47 members, 25 represent national, cultural, ethnic organizations. So we do have an opportunity to engage in dialogue, engage in direct dialogue, and they have this opportunity to speak with the head of this state, with the head of local authorities. Aren't we talking about civil society in this case? I don't hear any applauses for some reason. I will also address this question brief. I'm not a great specialist as far as diasporas are concerned. I've been quite active in youth policies. National Council has two major ethnic organizations, AMOR and the youth wing of the Union of Armenians in Russia, and a number of smaller cultural or ethnic youth organizations. Indeed, they do play a great role in maintaining harmony, and even at this everyday level when we have to address all sorts of everyday problems, these youth organizations are just save the situation. And of course, they do what they must be doing. They help those people who come to Russia for the first time. They help us establish relations with those new citizens of the Russian Federation. They engage them in our civil activities. So I would like to thank all of all organizations, because you do play a very important role. Thank you for giving this opportunity. I can say that in Russia we have 19 federal national cultural autonomies registered, including the Azerbaijani one. On top of that, we have a number of unions and organizations which are very well represented in the Assembly of Peoples of Russia, in the Presidential Council. They do have an opportunity to meet at least twice a year, to meet the President of the Russian Federation and voice their concerns and proposals. We also have a federal law on the national cultural autonomies or ethnic cultural autonomies that regulates such organizations. We're looking for ways to strengthen that law, so that the state will be able to offer real support. We invest certain powers on them. They help us in adapting migrants to our realities, things like that. But for them to be able to do that, they need certain funding, they need financial resources. We're looking for ways to support them financially, for them to be able to implement and carry out their powers. Thank you. Thank you all, dear friends. Let's thank all our panelists, our experts and speakers. We have exceeded the time limit. Let's continue discussion individually if you have any questions. Thank you very much.